Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I am your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about Math in Comics 3 events, crossovers, and tie ins. So, here's the thing, right? I had a couple other videos on math and comics, and I'll link them in the description. And if I make a playlist, I'll put that in there too. But the idea is like there's a lot to say about comics, and there's a lot to say about math and comics. So, I wanted to continue where I left off, and this time talk specifically about events, crossovers, and tie-ins. So for me, when I think about event comics, I think about the storylines that are big, larger than life, and they affect um, a character or several characters. So for me, you can have an event for a character, or you can have an event with characters in a shared universe, in which case, at that point, it's a crossover. But with crossovers, you could also have them on a smaller scale, right? Because you could have like a team up where it's just like two people or more people, and maybe they have something going on, or maybe they're fighting each other. Um, and it can be a little bit smaller than some bigger crossover event, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure if that distinction helps people or not, but figure I'd throw it in there. In any case, there's a lot of math and all of that, which you might not immediately think. But what I want to do is I want to talk about how like math is used in comics in general, then kind of use that to flesh out the topics for this video. So when I think about math in comics, like I think about how comics is also known as sequential art, right? And so math is baked into the medium at its very core. And I think about how much is involved in telling a story, and that could be just like in a single issue. So when you get bigger, it gets crazier. So like in a single issue of a comic, for instance, right? You're having a particular story that you want to tell in that comic, and so you have to have that mapped out, and you have it be a certain number of pages, and each of those pages has a certain number of panels, and you can play around with what you put in those panels. And there's a lot of math that goes into all of that I just said, but also where you position things in a panel, how you draw characters, how you draw like the world, how things work proportionally. There's a lot of math in all of it. There's a lot of math in the inking. There's a lot of math in the coloring and how you choose to deliver the story. And so that's just for a single issue. So if you have an ongoing series with with no end necessarily in sight, you can still have an idea of where you want to go for different storylines. And so then enter the event, right? If you start with like events that like affect a particular character, then you might be planning things out like years in advance, and you might have a particular thing that you might want to be doing with that character. Sometimes you just want to tell a good story, but as comics often go, you might have some editor mandates, and so there might be certain things that an editor wants to do behind the scene that affects how a story is told. But you could have some interesting things come out of that as a result. So that being said, there's a lot of math that goes into the planning and the logistics of an event, and this is just like on that single level, right? Like for a particular character, because you have to plot out everything, and you might want certain artists or writers on it, and you might be expecting to have a certain amount of money that is made, right? And with that, it could be like the number of comics sold. It could be the numbers of like toys sold or other items that you merchandise out there. And the idea is that there's math in all of it. And then you start to look over like for a crossover, for instance, you might have like maybe Spider-Man teaming up with X-Men or something, and so now you're trying to make things make sense with like both of those characters, and there's a lot of math that goes into making that work. And I think that's cool. And then you get to the bigger crossover events, and I think that's where things really get crazy, because chances are there's a huge mandate. So I think like in the last video I talked a little bit about like Secret Wars, and so I think that'll be like good too. So for here too, like and want to talk about some other ones as well. So for some event comics, they may be, or some crossover events, they might be aimed at rebooting or just getting a bunch of different things in there. right? So for Secret Wars, for instance, the focus was absolutely to make money, and if I'm not mistaken, the idea was like, hey, we want to sell a bunch of toys, and we want to make this event to do that, and it set the precedent for a lot of things that would follow. Because now event comics are not rare; they're pretty common, and yeah, they do make a lot of money, and that's motivation. And what you do with a lot of these like is dependent on what a company wants to do or an editor. And in the case of Secret Wars, so they wanted to make that event, they wanted to make money, and we actually got a good story out of it, one that's like outright considered classic. And it was made over 30 years ago, going on 40 in fact, which is insane, utterly insane. um, because it initially came out 1984, 1985, um, and it holds up. And again, that's almost 4 years. That's insane. But that being said, right, there's so much that goes into an event like that because it wasn't just like one character; it was several. And so a lot of things happened in that story. A lot of characters were introduced. A lot of people teamed up. A lot of people fought each other, and these things had to be plotted out, right? And a lot of money was made, a lot of merchandise was sold, and there's a lot of math and all of that and how it works and how it functions. And like with Secret Wars, like it was also the motivation, like given how much money they made, there was the motivation behind actually making sequels to that, which honestly didn't do as well. Like the same spirit wasn't there because even though like Secret Wars, the motivation was financial, they were allowed to tell a good story. Right? You had a lot of people working together and deciding, oh, well, we want to have this 12 issue series. We have a certain amount of issue that we had in mind, and we want to tell this in this issue. We want to all work together to have all these amazing things happen, right? So there's a lot of math in that, and there was a fair amount of freedom in a sense. But with the other ones, it's just like, oh, so this did really well. Let's make sequels. And there was like a Secret Wars 2, and it's like, yeah. And then there was a smaller Secret Wars 3, which was told in Fantastic Four. And so Secret Wars is very interesting because it, you know, they did a lot, and it worked. And again, it set the precedent for a lot of things, like that and like Crisis on Infinite Earths, like from DC, because their whole thing is like DC, they do more large scale reboots, more hard reboots than Marvel. Marvel didn't really do a hard reboot, as far as I know, until 2015 when they did a kind of sequel to Secret Wars, but is more like in the name. And there's things to be said about that and math and all that too. But when I think about like DC, there was a lot that was going on that too, because like they brought in all these crazy things with like the alternate universes, and they also had to create like enemies that were so powerful, like an enemy that was so powerful that it had to have everyone in the multiverse shook. And I think that's interesting too because there's a lot of math involved in scaling in comic books. And right, we're coming like when you look at Crisis on Infinite Earths, not only did that like also help set the trend for a lot of like event comics to take place, and also whole DC's whole form was about reboots, but um, it was an interesting look at how you handle scaling because what did they have to do? They had to have a big bad that could go toe to toe with characters like Superman from the Silver Age, and that's utterly wild. Silver Age Superman was OP, even by Superman standards. Like it was fundamentally bonkers. But you have characters like that. You have a lot of other characters that were like wildly powerful. Like Supergirl was like really powerful too, and you have like them. You have the Flashes. You have the Green Lantern Corps, Wonder Woman. Even though Batman's not on the same scale, you have Batman in the mix because Batman's gonna do what Batman's gonna do. But you have all these things going on, and it's just like, it's fascinating because there's a lot of math in showing the level of a threat. Because it's like, like how powerful does this person have to be? Well, you have to do things to illustrate that, right? And there's a lot of math and how all that's shown across the page, across issues, and I think that's all pretty interesting. Um, and all that being said, So one of the things that has become more regular when you get like these big crossover events is tie-in events, right? Where there's these like or sorry, tie-in issues, where you get these issues that give you more about the story, but they're not as big as some of the main issues in the book. And the thing about that is, and this is where like you have to start to consider some things is a reader. So if you're a reader, what do you do with that, right? If you're someone who is kind of like a completionist, then you're looking at a lot of time and money for some of these because like if you look at like a big crossover event, you might have all these different tie-in issues, and then like you're following like the main issues, and with these main issues, you might have all these events going in the background there, and so from a reader standpoint, it's like, well, okay, I'm following this crossover event. I might not know how long it may last. I might not know how many issues are involved, but I want to follow it. And so it's like, well, is it going to be worth your time investment? Is it going to be worth your money investment? And you have to decide that. And there's math in that, and it's going to vary with person to person in terms of what do you think is worth it. And I think that's interesting. But like all that being said, given how much money is involved in crossover events and events in general, and like tie-ins and all that, I don't see any of that ending anytime soon. There's a lot of money in all of it. There's a lot of math in all that. So from their perspective, it makes sense. And I think that's interesting. And then just like when you are behind the scenes, it's like, what do, right? Because you want to make money and you want to have all these stories happen, but you might not necessarily care about quality. But I do think that you should be caring about quality because right, if you have trash, then people won't want to buy it after a while. And with comics, though, it's been a lot of hit and miss. And it's fascinating to look at how that plays out. That being said, I want to bring this video to a close. I do have some more stuff to talk about in the future as far as like math and comics are concerned. And I'm going to have fun with them. I'll see you in the next one. Professor Grime out.